The life and legacy of George Washington, the father of a nation, in the quiet rolling hills of Weston County, Virginia, on February 22, 1732, a boy was born who would shape the very foundations of a new world. His name was George Washington, and though he came into the world without fortune or noble blood, his destiny was already woven into the stars. George was the son of Augustine and Mary Ball Washington, members of the Virginia gentry, though not among the wealthiest. When George was just 11, his father died, leaving his education somewhat limited, but what he lacked in formal schooling he made up for with discipline, ambition, and curiosity. He studied surveying, geometry, and practical subjects, and by age 17, he had become a professional land surveyor, exploring the vast and wild lands of the Virginia frontier. The young man learned to navigate both the landscape and the complex politics of colonial life. The seeds of leadership were planted early. At 20, Washington joined the Virginia militia, and by 22, he was already involved in the French and Indian War, a brutal conflict between Britain and France for control of North America. His first major experience came in 1754 at Fort Necessity, where he led a small force and suffered a humbling defeat, but even in loss he gained something priceless: a reputation for bravery, determination, and composure under pressure. He later served under British General Braddock in a disastrous campaign near Fort Duquesne, where he emerged as a hero for rallying the troops amid chaos. These early experiences forged a military mind that valued preparation, patience, and strategic thinking. By the war's end, Washington resigned from the militia and returned to Virginia, where a new chapter awaited him. In 1759, George married the wealthy widow Martha Custis, bringing land wealth and 2 stepchildren into his life. At Mount Vernon, his plantation overlooking the Potomac River, he became a model Virginia gentleman, farming, entertaining, and managing his estates. Though comfortable, Washington remained restless. He was deeply engaged in colonial politics, serving in the Virginia House of Burgesses and observing with growing frustration Britain's treatment of its American colonies. When Parliament imposed new taxes, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, and the Tea Act, Washington joined others in boycotting British goods, aligning himself with the rising tide of resistance. A storm was coming, and Washington was ready. In 1775, as conflict erupted at Lexington and Concord, the Continental Congress gathered in Philadelphia to decide how to respond. Washington, tall, dignified, and dressed in his military uniform, was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. What followed was 8 grueling years of war against the most powerful empire on earth. Washington's leadership held the fledgling army together through early defeats in New York, winters at Valley Forge, and scarce resources, but his resilience, unwavering sense of duty, and willingness to listen to his generals eventually turned the tide, with help from France and strategic victories at Trenton, Princeton, and finally Yorktown. In 1781, Washington forced the British to surrender. He could have become a king. Instead, he resigned his commission, returning to private life. It was one of the most powerful acts in history, choosing humility over power. In the years after the war, America floundered under the weak Articles of Confederation. Calls grew for a stronger central government, and in 1787 Washington was chosen to preside over the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. Though quiet during debates, his very presence gave the gathering legitimacy. When the U.S. Constitution was ratified, there was only one man the people trusted to lead this new experiment in liberty. In 1789, George Washington was unanimously elected the first president of the United States. As President, Washington knew he was setting every precedent. There had been no republic like this before, no road map. He established the cabinet, appointed Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury, and worked to unify a fragile union of former colonies. He oversaw the creation of the Bill of Rights, calmed internal unrest like the Whiskey Rebellion, and navigated foreign affairs with neutrality and caution, refusing to entangle America in European wars. He declined the trappings of monarchy, insisted on being called Mr. President, and stepped down after 2 terms, cementing the principle of peaceful transfer of power. His farewell address warned against political parties and permanent foreign alliances, offering wisdom still studied today. After retiring from the presidency in 179, Washington returned to Mount Vernon, longing for peace and quiet, but his sense of duty never faded. When war with France loomed in 1798, President John Adams asked Washington to lead the army again. He agreed, though he remained at home. On December 14, 1799, after falling ill with a severe throat infection, George Washington passed away. The nation mourned its first and greatest leader. Napoleon ordered 10 days of mourning in France. British ships lowered their flags, and across America bells tolled, candles flickered, and tears fell. George Washington was more than a general, more than a president. He was the embodiment of a nation's ideals. He turned down absolute power, established a republic, and gave the fledgling country the gift of trust in leadership. His honesty, integrity, and Sense of duty remain benchmarks for presidents and citizens alike. Monuments, towns, and schools bear his name, and his example still guides the American spirit. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, picture a man standing beneath a snowy sky at Valley Forge, wrapped in a worn coat, looking out at an army that believes in him. Imagine him riding into New York as the war ends, modest and humble, then walking away from power, not clinging to it, standing beneath the stars of a new flag, unsure of what lies ahead but willing to lead, because George Washington believed in the impossible dream of a free republic. That dream became real. John Adams, the reluctant patriot. On October 30th, 1735, in the modest town of Braintree, Massachusetts, a boy was born who would help carve a nation from rebellion. His name was John Adams, and while his fame would always be in the shadow of larger-than-life figures, his role in the founding of the United States was no less profound. The son of a farmer and shoemaker, young John grew up with a strong sense of duty, education, and faith. He was a spirited child, sharp-witted and independent. Though he disliked school at first, his brilliant mind eventually led him to Harvard College, where he studied law and fell in love with the power of ideas. John's early ambition to make his mark on the world, not through war or wealth, but through words and justice. Adams began his career as a lawyer in Boston, where he quickly earned a reputation for integrity and intellect. He stood for what was right, even when it was unpopular. In 1770, when British soldiers fired into a crowd during the Boston Massacre, killing 5 civilians, Adams took on the daunting task of defending the soldiers in court. He believed that every person deserved a fair trial, and though his defense was controversial, he won 8 for most of the accused. Facts are stubborn things, he said in court. It was a lesson America would come to learn. But while Adams defended British soldiers in the courtroom, his heart was increasingly drawn to the cause of American independence. As tensions with Britain mounted, Adams became a delegate to the First and Second Continental Congresses, where he emerged as a fiery advocate for separation. He nominated George Washington to lead the Continental Army, argued tirelessly for rebellion, and eventually played a central role in drafting and securing passage of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. While Thomas Jefferson was chosen to write the document, it was Adams who championed it, defending its principles with relentless passion. The 2nd day of July 1776 will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America, he predicted, not knowing that the signing on the 4th would become the celebrated date. In truth, John Adams was the engine of independence. After the Revolution began, Adams was sent across the Atlantic as a diplomat, braving storms and war to build alliances and secure peace. He negotiated with France, the Dutch Republic, and finally helped draft the Treaty of Paris, which ended the war in 1783. Through bitter winters, hostile politics, and lonely months away from his beloved wife Abigail, Adams remained steadfast. His letters to Abigail, written with love, wit, and longing, are among the most beautiful and revealing correspondences in American history. Together, they were equals, partners in a nation's birth. When the new U.S. government was formed under the Constitution, Adams was elected as America's first vice president, serving under George Washington from 1789 to 1797. Though the role offered little influence, Adams famously described it as the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man contract arrived. He remained loyal to the young republic, presiding over the Senate and observing the fledgling government's formation. It was a time of ideological rifts with emerging political factions led by Hamiltonian Federalists and Jeffersonian Republicans. Adams, a Federalist, believed in strong central government and feared the rise of populism and mob rule. In 1796, Adams became the 2nd president of the United States, narrowly defeating his friend-turned-rival Thomas Jefferson, who became vice president under the old electoral system. His presidency was marked by tension and turmoil, the quasi-war with France, a naval conflict born from diplomatic breakdowns, the Alien and Sedition Acts passed under his administration, which were criticized as oppressive and un-American. Despite the strife, Adams made perhaps his most important decision in 1800. He refused to go to war with France, even under immense pressure from his own party. He chose peace over popularity. It cost him re-election, but history would prove him right. In 1800, Adams lost the presidency to Thomas Jefferson, marking the first peaceful transfer of power between political rivals in American history. It was a remarkable moment for a young republic. Adams left Washington, quietly returning to his farm in Quincy, Massachusetts. His final years were spent in reflection, reading, writing, and cherishing time with his family. He and Jefferson eventually rekindled their friendship, exchanging a famous series of letters that discussed philosophy, politics, and their shared history. Two giants of the Revolution, once bitter enemies, became wise old friends. On July 4, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, John Adams lay dying. His final words were said to be, "Thomas Jefferson survives." Unbeknownst to him, Jefferson had died just hours earlier. The two revolutionaries, born in opposition but united in purpose, had departed on the very birthday of their nation. It was as if fate had woven poetry into history. John Adams never courted fame. He was prickly proud and often misunderstood, but he was also brilliant, principled, and indispensable. He was the architect of independence, the conscience of the revolution, and a relentless voice for law, reason, and Republican values. He understood the dangers of unchecked power and the fragility of liberty. His love for Abigail, his family, and his country shines through the ages. Today we remember him not for glory or charisma, but for his unyielding devotion to the idea of America. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, picture a man at his desk, candle flickering, pen scratching on parchment. He is writing to his wife, or drafting a defense of liberty, or wrestling with the burdens of a fragile nation. He is not seeking praise. He is doing what must be done, because John Adams believed that honor was worth more than popularity. A new nation found its voice. Thomas Jefferson, the penman of liberty in the gentle hills of Shadwell, Virginia, on April 13, 1743, a boy was born who would write the most powerful words in American history. His name was That's Jefferson, and from the moment he could read, he consumed the world. Raised on a plantation by his father Peter Jefferson, a surveyor and planter, and his mother Jane Randolph from one of Virginia's most prominent families, young Thomas grew up surrounded by books, forests, and ideas. His father died when he was just 14, but he left behind a world of learning. Jefferson would become a Renaissance man, a thinker, writer, inventor, architect, musician, and farmer. He was quiet, but his mind blazed like fire. Jefferson attended the College of William and Mary, studying Latin, Greek, philosophy, and law. He was shaped by the Enlightenment, a belief in reason, science, and the perfectibility of man. By his early 20s, he was practicing law and serving in the Virginia House of Burgesses, where his belief in liberty and limited government took root. He admired John Locke, studied Newton, and filled his library with volumes on government, architecture, and agriculture. But it was not until the 1770s that Jefferson would truly begin to shape a nation. In 1776, as the colonies inched toward full rebellion, the Continental Congress appointed a committee to draft a Declaration of Independence from Britain. Jefferson, the youngest member, was chosen to write it, and so, in a rented room in Philadelphia, with a feather quill and a heart full of conviction, Jefferson penned these immortal words: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." The Declaration of Independence was adopted on July 4, 1776, and the world changed. Jefferson had given voice to a revolution after independence. Jefferson served as governor of Virginia, guiding the state through the chaos of war. He faced criticism for his handling of British invasions, but his dedication to public education, law reform, and religious freedom left a lasting mark. He then served as minister to France, following in Benjamin Franklin's footsteps there. He observed the early tremors of the French Revolution, empathizing with the ideals but fearing its violent extremes. During these years, tragedy struck. His beloved wife, Martha Wales Skelton Jefferson, whom he adored, died in 1782. Jefferson was devastated. He promised her he would never remarry and kept her memory alive in every part of his home. Returning to the U.S., Jefferson was appointed Secretary of State under President George Washington, but clashes with Alexander Hamilton, his Federalist rival, soon defined his role. Jefferson led the Democratic Republicans, advocating for iron democracy over industrial capitalism, states' rights over centralized power, liberty over order. He believed the strength of America lay in its farmers, not its bankers. The political divide between Jefferson and Hamilton would shape the future of American parties. After serving as vice president under John Adams, Jefferson ran for president in 1800. The campaign was brutal, filled with mudslinging, rumors, and division, but Jefferson won after a dramatic tie in the Electoral College and a tense decision by the House of Representatives. His election was the first peaceful transfer of power between opposing parties in American history. In his inaugural address, he famously said, "We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists." He sought unity and embarked on a presidency of monumental achievements. As president, Jefferson reduced the national debt, cut military spending, and repealed unpopular taxes, but his greatest legacy was the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. He bought 828,000 square miles of land from France for $15 million, doubling the size of the United States. Though Jefferson had doubts about the constitutionality of the purchase, he believed in a vision of an empire of liberty, a nation of free farmers stretching from sea to shining sea. He also sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to explore the new territory, launching one of the most legendary expeditions in American history. Not all of Jefferson's presidency was triumph. His second term was marred by tensions with Britain and France, whose naval conflicts disrupted American trade. Jefferson responded with the Embargo Act of 1807, halting U.S. exports. The ACT backfired, damaging American commerce and earning widespread criticism. In 1809, he retired to Manello, his beloved Virginia estate. There he designed buildings, experimented with crops, and corresponded with friends and enemies alike. He also founded the University of Virginia, calling it the hobby of my old age. He believed education was the safeguard of democracy. In his final years, Jefferson rekindled a remarkable friendship with John Adams, his old rival. Their letters are a treasure trove of philosophical reflection, humor, and love for their country. On July 4, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson passed away at Monticello a few hours later. So did John Adams, two giants of the Revolution gone on the same day. As if the heavens honored their lifelong service, Jefferson's life was filled with contradictions. He wrote, "All men are created equal, yet owned enslaved people, including Sally Hemings, with whom he likely had several children. He dreamed of liberty, yet lived in a system of bondage." Today, we remember Jefferson as both a visionary and a flawed man whose pen gave voice to the ideals of a new nation. He designed Monticello, wrote the Declaration, founded a university, and inspired generations. His belief in freedom, education, and democratic ideals still echoes across the globe. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, imagine a candlelit room in Philadelphia. A quiet man leans over a desk, ink-stained fingers guiding his quill across parchment. He is writing a promise, a bold declaration that people are born free, that government serves the governed, and that the world can be different because Thomas Jefferson believed in the power of ideas. The world changed the life and legacy of James Madison, the quiet architect in the gentle countryside of Port Conway, Virginia. On March 16, 1751, a baby boy was born who would one day draft the very foundation of a nation. His name was James Madison, and though he was small in stature, barely 5 feet, often frail and soft-spoken, his mind was a towering force. Raised on a tobacco plantation in Orange County, Madison was the eldest of 12 children in a wealthy but grounded family. From a young age, he was known for his intense curiosity, devouring books with the appetite of a philosopher. He studied Latin, Greek, history, mathematics, and law, and was drawn to the great thinkers of the Enlightenment at Princeton University, then the College of New Jersey. He completed a 4-year degree in two. Driven by his hunger for knowledge, he would become the most bookish, perhaps the most introverted of all the founding fathers, but never mistake quiet for weak. Madison would go on to design the blueprints of a nation. By the 1770s, the colonies were boiling with unrest. Though Madison was not a fiery speaker or battlefield hero, he believed deeply in liberty and representative government. He served in the Virginia state legislature and befriended Thomas Jefferson, with whom he would share a lifelong bond. In 1780, Madison was elected to the Continental Congress, where he became a champion of strengthening the fragile American government. He saw firsthand how the Articles of Confederation left the new nation weak and fractured. He began dreaming of a system that could balance freedom with unity, state power with federal strength, a system bold enough to last. In 1787, Madison arrived in Philadelphia with a plan. Before the Constitutional Convention even began, he drafted a detailed blueprint, what became known as the Virginia Plan, proposing a government with 3 branches and a system of checks and balances. During the convention, Madison spoke over 150 times, took meticulous notes, and became the intellectual heartbeat of the gathering. Though many men contributed, it was Madison who provided the architecture of the United States Constitution. Afterward, he, along with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, wrote the Federalist Papers, persuasive essays defending the Constitution. Madison's essays, especially Federalist No. 10 and No. 51, are still studied today for their brilliance in explaining democracy. He had helped build a government not of kings or mobs but of reason and law. Though Madison had once doubted the need for amendments, he listened to critics who feared the Constitution lacked protections for individual liberties. Once in the first Congress as a representative from Virginia, Madison took the lead in drafting what would become the Bill of Rights. In 1791, 10 amendments were ratified guaranteeing freedom of speech, religion, the press, and due process. Madison had again proven himself not just an architect but a guardian of liberty. In 1794, at the age of 43, Madison married Dolly Payne Todd, a vibrant young widow with charm, grace, and social brilliance. Where Madison was reserved, Dolly sparkled. She would become one of the most beloved first ladies in history, hosting salons and political gatherings that softened even the hardest divisions together. They were a perfect political partnership. His intellect, her warmth. Madison served as Secretary of State under President Jefferson, helping manage the Louisiana Purchase and defending American shipping rights against British and French interference. But soon it would be Madison's turn to take the helm. In 1809, James Madison became the 4th President of the United States, inheriting a nation increasingly caught between European powers. The War of 1812 would define his presidency, driven by British violations of American sovereignty, impressing sailors, blocking trade. Madison reluctantly asked Congress to declare war. The war was chaotic, poorly prepared, and controversial. In 1814, British troops invaded Washington, D.C., burning the White House. Dali famously rescued important documents and a portrait of George Washington before fleeing, but the war ended in 1815 with the Treaty of Ghent, and a new sense of American identity was born. The defense of New Orleans, led by Andrew Jackson, stirred patriotism and pride. Madison, once the quiet student, had presided over one of the most dramatic chapters in U.S. history. After leaving office in 1817, Madison retired to his estate Montpelier in the Virginia Piedmont. He spent his later years farming, managing debts, and continuing his deep interest in constitutional theory. He also served as rector of the University of Virginia, helping Jefferson nurture a new generation of thinkers as sectional tensions grew over slavery. Madison, like many of his time, struggled with contradictions, though he opposed the international slave trade and hoped for gradual emancipation. He owned enslaved people his entire life. His legacy, like Jefferson's, is marked by both extraordinary vision and troubling hypocrisy. James Madison died on June 28, 1836, at the age of 85, the last surviving signer of the Constitution. He had outlived his peers, watched the country he helped create grow and strain, and left behind a legacy of thoughtful governance, deliberate debate, and constitutional devotion. His words remain etched in law, his vision still alive in every branch of government. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, imagine a small man in a tall chair surrounded by books, maps, and drafts. His hand moves across parchment. He writes of checks and balances, of factions and freedoms, of republic built on law. He is not seeking fame, he is building something greater, a system where ideas, not men, rule. Because James Madison believed in thoughtful liberty, the American experiment found its enduring shape. James Monroe, the last founding father in the quiet woods of Westland County, Virginia, on April 28, 1758, a child was born who would one day become the 5th President of the United States. His name was James Monroe, and though less flamboyant than some of his revolutionary peers, his legacy would prove enduring. He was the son of a modest planter and carpenter. After his father's early death, young James took over family responsibilities, but also pursued education, eventually enrolling at the College of William and Mary in 1776. At just 18, Monroe left college to join the Continental Army. The cause of liberty called, and he would answer it for the rest of his life. Monroe joined the 3rd Virginia Regiment, serving bravely under General George Washington. He fought at the Battle of Trenton, where he was wounded in the shoulder during the daring Christmas attack across the Delaware River. He endured the hardships of Valley Forge and earned the respect of his fellow patriots. Though he rose to the rank of Major, Monroe left active service to study law under Thomas Jefferson, forging a lifelong friendship and mentorship that would shape his future. His service in uniform gave him a grounding in sacrifice, duty, and the cause of independence. Monroe entered politics as a delegate to the Continental Congress and later helped draft Virginia's new Constitution. He served in the U.S. Senate and later became governor of Virginia, not once but twice. In the 1790s, Monroe was appointed minister to France by President Washington. Though his diplomatic style was too warm for Federalist tastes, he grew popular with the French during their revolution, sympathizing with their struggle for liberty. Later, as minister to Britain, he worked to ease tensions during strained post-war years. Though not always with success, still Monroe was a trusted envoy and public servant, always striving for unity and be under President James Madison. Monroe served as both Secretary of State and Secretary of War during the War of 1812, the only person in American history to hold both posts simultaneously. With Washington burned and morale low, Monroe helped reorganize the military guide strategy and rebuild confidence. His leadership helped ensure American victory and marked him as a steady, capable hand in times of crisis. When the war ended and Madison's term concluded, Monroe was the natural successor. In 1817, James Monroe became the 5th President of the United States. His presidency ushered in what historians call the era of good feelings, a time of national unity, economic growth, and post-war optimism. Monroe toured the country, shaking hands with veterans, listening to citizens, and earning respect across party lines. Though political division simmered, Monroe avoided entanglement in partisan drama. He believed in American nationalism, economic development, and westward expansion. Perhaps Monroe's most lasting legacy came in 1823 when he delivered a message to Congress that would define American foreign policy for generations. In his annual message, Monroe declared that the Western Hemisphere was closed to further European colonization and that the United States would oppose interference in the affairs of independent nations in the Americas. This bold stance, later known as the Monroe Doctrine, asserted U.S. influence in the New World and became a cornerstone of American diplomacy. Though drafted largely by Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, it bore Monroe's name in his resolve. During Monroe's presidency, the U.S. acquired Florida from Spain through the Adams-Once Treaty and saw 5 new states joined the Union, but the growth also brought division. The Missouri Compromise of 1820, which Monroe signed, admitted Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free one while banning slavery north of the 36 degrees 30 minutes line. It temporarily quelled tensions, but the issue of slavery would return. Monroe, a slaveholder himself, hoped the country could avoid disunion, but his legacy, like many founders, remains entangled in that deep contradiction. After 2 terms, Monroe retired from public life in 1825. He returned to Virginia and struggled with debts as many former presidents did. His beloved wife Elizabeth Cartwright Monroe, a quiet and elegant first lady, passed away in 1830. Monroe moved to New York City to live with his daughter there on July 4, 1831, 5 years to the day after Jefferson and Adams died. James Monroe passed away at the age of 73. 3 founding fathers, 3 former presidents, all gone on the anniversary of the nation they helped create. The symbolism was staggering. James Monroe was the last president who had fought in the Revolutionary War and the last of the so-called Virginia dynasty. Though less eloquent than Jeff or bold than Washington, Monroe was a steady hand, a unifying figure, and a man who put the nation before himself. His doctrine lived on, invoked by presidents from Lincoln to Roosevelt to Kennedy. His belief in American strength, dignity, and independence continues to shape policy and perspective, and while he lived in a world of compromise and complexity, he remains a symbol of quiet leadership. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, imagine a man walking the fields of Virginia, remembering a time when he was young, wounded, and marching through snow behind George Washington. Picture him standing before Congress, calmly announcing to the world that America would stand tall and defend its neighbors. Imagine a man who never sought glory but who carried the memory of revolution in his heart and the weight of a growing nation on his shoulders. Because James Monroe believed in strength through unity, the nation he helped nurture continued to grow. John Quincy Adams, the reluctant champion, on July 11, 1767, in a small saltbox house in Brain Tree, Massachusetts, a baby boy was born into the very heart of America's founding storm. His name was John Quincy Adams, and his father was none other than John Adams, future second president of the United States. His mother, Abigail Adams, was a fierce intellect and tireless moral compass. As a child, John Quincy witnessed the American Revolution with his own eyes, standing atop of hill to watch the Battle of Bunker Hill, traveling across Europe during his father's diplomatic missions, and even meeting world leaders like Catherine the Great and Benjamin Franklin. Before he was old enough to vote, he was not born into privilege, but into purpose. John Quincy Adams was fluent in multiple languages by adolescence. He studied at European ACMUS, attended Harvard University, and absorbed the philosophies of liberty, governance, and diplomacy at just 14 years old. He served as secretary to the American envoy in Russia. By 26, he was named U.S. Minister to the Netherlands, and soon after he became minister to Prussia. Even George Washington praised his diplomatic talents, calling him the ablest of all our young men. He had the education of a prince, but his mission was always the Republic. In 1703, Adams was elected to the U.S. Senate representing Massachusetts. Though a Federalist by party, he followed his conscience more than any faction, often to his political detriment. He supported Thomas Jefferson Louisiana Purchase, infuriating his party and demonstrating that he cared more for principle than popularity. His independence earned him a reputation as a maverick, a man guided by vision, not vanity. Soon after, President James Madison appointed him as minister to Russia and later to Britain, where he helped negotiate the Treaty of Ghent, ending the War of 1812. His diplomacy helped repair a wounded young nation under President James Monroe. Adams served as Secretary of State, and it was here he achieved greatness. He orchestrated the Adams-Honest Treaty, acquiring Florida from Spain and establishing the U.S. border with Spanish territory in the West. He supported internal improvements and commercial expansion, believing in a strong, growing republic. But his most famous legacy was the Monroe Doctrine. Though it bore Monroe's name, it was Adams who crafted the bold policy. The Americas would no longer be open to European colonization. It was a clear message: the Western Hemisphere belonged to the New World. He had laid down the diplomatic foundations of American power. In 1824, Adams ran for president in a crowded field that included Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, and William Crawford. Though Jackson won the popular vote, no candidate received a majority in the Electoral College. The decision went to the House of Representatives. With Clay's support, Adams was elected. Jackson's supporters cried foul, calling it a corrupt bargain. From the moment he entered office, his presidency was haunted by suspicion. Still, Adams pursued ambitious goals, building national universities, scientific institutions, and an extensive transportation network. He envisioned an America bound by roads, canals, and ideas, but Congress, dominated by Jacksonian opposition, thwarted many of his initiatives. His was a president of frustrated brilliance. After losing the 1828 election to Andrew Jackson, Adams might have faded into retirement. Instead, he embarked on a historic second act in 1831. He was elected to the House of Representatives, becoming the only former president to serve in Congress there. He found his truest voice. He championed infrastructure science, and most notably the abolition of slavery. He became known as Old Man Eloquent for his impassioned speeches and tireless advocacy. For 17 years he battled the gag rule, which prevented anti-slavery petitions from being read in Congress. He fought for the right to speak on behalf of the voiceless. In 1841, Adams argued before the Supreme Court on behalf of enslaved Africans who had seized control of the ship Amistad after being illegally trafficked. Though aged and frail, Adams stood in court for 4 hours defending their right to freedom with powerful oratory and moral conviction. He won the case. It was a triumph not only of law but of con. In February 1848, while speaking on the floor of the House, John Quincy Adams collapsed at his desk. He was carried to the Speaker's room, where he died 2 days later. His final words were, "This is the last of earth. I am content." He had served his country for over 50 years across 3 continents and 6 presidencies. John Quincy Adams was not a populist. He was not a war hero. He was never the most beloved of men, but he was brilliant, principled, and unyielding. He believed in education, diplomacy, justice, and truth. He believed that America could be better, not just richer or larger, but more just and free. And though his time as president was brief, his legacy as a moral force in American politics remains unmatched. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, imagine a man walking the halls of Congress, old and bowed, but never silenced. Picture him standing before the Supreme Court, defending the rights of the enslaved with a trembling voice and an iron will. Picture a child watching the revolution and a man who never stopped fighting for its promise. Because John Quincy Adams believed in duty beyond office and truth above power, America kept striving toward the light and drew Jackson, the storm, and the sword on March 15, 1767, in a backward settlement on the border of North and South Carolina. A boy was born into poverty, hardship, and the echoes of rebellion. His name was Andrew Jackson, and his life would be defined by conflict from orphanhood to battlefields to the Oval Office. His father died before he was born, and by the time he was 14, Jackson had lost his mother and 2 brothers to the ravages of the American Revolutionary War. Captured by the British, he was beaten by an officer for refusing to polish his boots, a scar that never faded. These early wounds shaped him into a man of grit, rage, and unstoppable will. Jackson studied law in North Carolina and rode west to the frontier town of Nashville, Tennessee, where he built a successful legal practice. He was quick with a temper, quicker with a pistol, and earned a reputation as both brilliant and brutal. In Nashville, he met Rachel Donaldson, a woman whose complicated divorce led to years of scandal and whispers. Nonetheless, they married, and Jackson adored her with a fiery, lifelong devotion. The law brought him influence, but it was war that would bring him fame. During the War of 1812, Jackson commanded U.S. forces against both Native American tribes and the British. His relentless pursuit of victory earned him the nickname Old Hickory. As tough and unyielding as the tree itself, at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in 1814, he defeated the Creek Nation, opening vast territory to American settlers. Soon after, he achieved one of the most stunning victories in U.S. history at the Battle of New Orleans, where his ragtag army repelled a seasoned British force with minimal casualties. He became a national hero, the embodiment of frontier defiance. In the years following the war, Jackson led military campaigns in Spanish Florida, clashing with Semold tribes and executing foreign agents, sparking diplomatic uproar. His boldness led to the Adams-West Treaty, which ceded Florida to the U.S. He served briefly as its governor before returning to Tennessee, but behind the victories lay a darker legacy. Jackson's Indian policies, rooted in a vision of American expansion, would later define one of the most painful chapters in U.S. history. In 1824, Jackson ran for president against John Quincy Adams, winning the popular vote but losing in the House of Representatives. Enraged, he decried the corrupt bargain that gave Adams the presidency and vowed revenge. In 1828, Jackson ran again, and this time he won. He became the 7th president of the United States and the first to rise from humble origins. To many, he was the champion of the common man, to others a populist tyrant, but all agreed Jackson would not be ignored. Jackson's presidency 1829 to 1837 ushered in a new era of American democracy. He expanded suffrage for white men, attacked the entrenched political elite, and positioned himself as the voice of the people. He wielded the presidential veto like a weapon, famously killing the Second Bank of the United States, which he saw as a corrupt tool of the wealthy. "I was born for a storm, and a calm does not suit me," he once said, and indeed his presidency was a tempest. Perhaps the most controversial and tragic act of Jackson's presidency was the Indian Removal Act of 1830. He believed Native American nations had no place within the growing us and pushed policies that forced them westward despite opposition and a Supreme Court ruling in Wurra versus Georgia that sided with the Cherokee. Jackson pressed On the result was the trail of years of forced migration that led to the suffering and death of thousands. It remains a stain on his legacy, impossible to ignore. Jackson also faced down a crisis of secession years before the Civil War, when South Carolina threatened to nullify federal tariffs and break from the Union. Jackson responded with a firm warning: disunion by armed force is treason. Are you ready to incur its guilt? He sent troops to enforce the law, and a compromise diffused the crisis. Jackson had preserved the Union but revealed the tensions that would later erupt into war. Jackson retired in 1837 to the Hermitage, his Tennessee plantation. There he wrote letters, welcomed visitors, and watched the country he shaped continue to evolve. He mourned Rachel, who had died before he took office, and remained devoted to her memory. He died on June 8, 1845, surrounded by family and friends. His last words: be good children, all of you, and strive to be ready when the change comes. Andrew Jackson's legacy is one of contradiction. He expanded democracy while denying it to many. He strengthened the presidency while defying the Supreme Court. He was a hero to some and a villain to others, but he changed the office, the nation, and the very meaning of what it was to be an American. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, imagine a man on horseback silhouetted by cannon fire, sword raised high. Imagine that same man standing alone in the Oval Office, resolute, unbending, braced against the storm. He was flawed, he was fierce, he was a force, because Andrew Jackson believed the people should rule. The presidency became a pulpit and the nation a battlefield of ideals. Martin Van Ban, the little magician in the quaint village of Kinderhook, New York, on December 5, 1782, a baby boy was born who would one day charm, scheme, and stride his way into the White House. His name was Martin Van Ban, and he would be the first president born after the American Revolution, the first born a citizen of the United States, and the first to prove that politics was a game, and he could play it better than anyone. His parents were of Dutch descent, and Martin grew up speaking Dutch as his first language, learning English only as he grew older. His father was a tavern keeper and farmer, giving young Martin early access to political talk, gossip, and negotiation at the tables of travelers. The boy, who listened quietly in the corner of the tavern, would one day orchestrate the rise of modern American politics. Van Buren was bright, quick-witted, and ambitious. He studied law through an apprenticeship. He never attended college and became a lawyer by the age of 21, but it was politics that called to him. In the New York State Senate, Van Buren became a master of political organization. He believed in building coalitions, creating networks, and keeping his friends close and his rivals even closer. He helped form the Albany Regency, a powerful political machine in New York. People began to call him the little magician for his ability to make deals, unite factions, and rise quietly without attracting too much fire. He wasn't a brawler, he was a strategist. By the 1820s, Van Buren had become a U.S. senator and was quickly becoming a force in national politics. He opposed elitism and supported the rise of the Democratic Party, championing the rights of the common man. He saw in Andrew Jackson a kindred spirit, strong, popular, and untamed. Van Buren helped engineer Jackson's 1828 presidential campaign, organizing a national party with unprecedented discipline. In return, Jackson made Van Buren his Secretary of State, then later Vice President, during his second term. The two men were vastly different in style. Jackson, the storm; Van Buren, the quiet wind that redirected it. In 1836, Jackson endorsed Van Buren as his successor. The little magician had climbed to the top. Martin Van Ban became the 8th President of the United States in 1837, stepping into office just as the country fell into the panic of 1837, a devastating financial crisis. As banks collapsed, businesses failed, and unemployment soared. Though the seeds of the panic were planted before his presidency, Van Buren bore the blame. He resisted calls for the federal government to intervene, heavily believing in limited government and fiscal discipline. He created the independent treasury system, separating federal funds from private banks, a policy praised in hindsight but controversial at the time. The panic stained his presidency. Despite economic troubles, Van Ban remained personally popular with many. He was elegant, polite, and a gifted conversationalist. He restored a sense of decorum to the presidency after Jackson's tempestuous years. He was also a fierce opponent of slavery expansion, though cautious in his approach. He tried to balance between abolitionist pressures and Southern resistance. A tight RPP few could walk, but in 1840 the Whigs rallied behind William Henry Harrison, a war hero, and used catchy slogans, hard cider, and log cabin imagery to paint Van Ban as out of touch. Van Ban is a used-up man, they cried, and it worked. Van Buren lost re-election in a landslide. After leaving office, Van Ban didn't fade away. He tried to return to the presidency in 1844, losing the Democratic nomination to James K. Polk in 1848. He made a bold stand against slavery's expansion, running as the Free Soil Party candidate. He knew he wouldn't win, but he helped shift the national conversation toward anti-slavery. It was his last campaign but one rooted in principle not ambition. Van Buren retired to his beloved estate Linden. Walled in Kinderhook, he wrote his memoirs, welcomed guests, and watched the nation grow ever more divided over slavery. He died on July 24, 1862. In the midst of the Civil War he had tried to prevent, though his presidency had faltered in crisis. His political genius, his party-building skills, and his opposition to slavery's spread made him a vital link in America's evolution. Martin Van Buren didn't win wars or write grand declarations, but he built the machine that made American democracy run. He created the first modern political party, believed in majority rule, and defended the importance of organization, debate, and peaceful power transfer. He was a tactician of republics, a conductor of democracy. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, picture a man in a fine coat, pacing a quiet study, pen in hand, whispering strategies that move nations. Imagine him sipping coffee at dawn, reviewing letters from all corners of the country, quietly weaving alliances that hold a fragile union together. Because Martin Van Buren believed politics could be an art, the United States became a more democratic, more responsive republic. William Henry Harrison, the brief flame. On February 9, 1773, in the heart of Charles City, County, Virginia, a baby boy was born into the American Revolution. His name was William Henry Harrison, and he came from one of Virginia's most distinguished families. His father, Benjamin Harrison I, was a sinner of the Declaration of Independence. Young William grew up among the ideals of liberty and governance, surrounded by the echoes of revolution and the weight of expectation. Though originally intended for medicine, fate had other plans for this restless, determined soul. In 1791, Harrison joined the U.S. Army and quickly distinguished himself in the Northwest Indian War, serving under General Anthony Wayne. His leadership and bravery helped secure American control of the Northwest Territory, earning him recognition and promotions. He married Anna Tothill, the daughter of a prominent judge, and together they would have 10 children. But it was Harrison's role as governor of the Indiana Territory that made his name known across the young nation as Governor Harrison. Negotiated land deals with Native American tribes, many of them controversial, and contested. Tensions escalated until 1811, when Harrison led U.S. forces against Tumpa and his confederation at the Battle of Tipo. It was a hard-fought victory that cemented Harrison's reputation as a frontier hero. Taipu and Tyler too would later become the most famous campaign slogan in American history. His fame only grew during the War of 1812, where he commanded U.S. forces in the Northwest, defeated British troops and native allies at the Battle of the Temps, and secured the region for the United States. He was hailed as a national hero. After the war, Harrison retired to his farm in North Bend, Ohio, but the call of politics proved too strong. He served as a congressman, senator, and minister to Columbia, often advocating for Western expansion and veterans' rights. He was a quiet statesman, not known for soaring rhetoric, but for his sense of duty and service. As tensions over slavery and states' rights simmered, Harrison emerged as a unifying figure, a war hero without deep political entanglements. In 1840, the newly formed Whig Party chose Harrison to run for president against Martin Van Buren. They crafted a brilliant campaign portraying Harrison as a humble frontiersman living in a log cabin, drinking hard cider and speaking for the common man. In truth, Harrison came from privilege, but the image stuck. With parade songs, buttons, and slogans, the Whigs energized voters like never before. Tipico and Tyler 2-0 became a rallying cry across the country. Harrison won by a landslide. On March 4, 1841, William Henry Harrison was sworn in as the 9th President of the United States. At 68, he was the oldest man ever elected to the office at the time. Determined to appear strong and vigorous, he delivered a 2-hour inaugural address, the longest in history, in freezing rain, without a coat or hat. A month later, he was dead. Harrison fell ill just weeks into his term, initially believed to be pneumonia, though latest studies suggest typhoid fever from contaminated water near the White House. He died on April 4, 1841, just 31 days after taking office. His presidency remains the shortest in American history. His death set a vital constitutional precedent. Vice President John Tyler assumed the full powers of the presidency, establishing the rule of presidential succession that remains today. Though his presidency was brief, the impact of his passing would shape the nation's understanding of executive power. William Henry Harrison was the first president to die in office. His passing shocked the nation and sparked debate, but it also unified the country in grief. He was remembered not just for what he might have done as president, but for a life of military valor, public service, and gentle humility. He had lived a full life and died at the highest point of public trust. Though his presidency was a flicker, his influence was felt for decades. His grandson Benjamin Harrison would later become the 23rd president. His campaign style helped usher in the age of modern electioneering. His success crisis helped clarify the Constitution's silence on presidential death. He was not a philosopher or visionary but a soldier, a father, and a reluctant politician who served when called. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, imagine a man in a log cabin, sipping cider, a saber from Tepa canoe hanging above the hearth. Picture him riding into the rain on Inauguration Day, proud, hopeful, unaware that history would remember him more for how briefly he stood than how long he fought, because William Henry Harrison believed in duty above comfort. He gave his all, even if for just 1 month. John Tyler, the accidental president. On March 29, 1790, in the rolling fields of Charles City County, Virginia, a baby boy was born into a family steeped in American tradition. His name was John Tyler, and like his predecessor William Henry Harrison, he was born into the world of Virginia aristocracy and revolution. His father, John Tyler Sr., was a judge-governor and close ally of Thomas Jefferson. From an early age, young John was fed a steady diet of states' rights, classical education, and Southern pride. He graduated from the College of William and Mary at just 17 and became a lawyer by 19, but his true passion, politics. Tyler quickly climbed the political ladder, serving in the Virginia state legislature, then the U.S. House of Representatives, and eventually as Governor of Virginia and U.S. Senator. He was a staunch advocate for states' rights, wary of centralized federal power, and often stood alone, voting on principle rather than party line. This independence earned him both admiration and isolation. Though once a Democrat, he grew disenchanted with Andrew Jackson's forceful presidency and joined the Whig Party, a strange fit but one that would shape his destiny. In 1840, the Whigs nominated war hero William Henry Harrison for president, and needing to balance the ticket with a Southern statesman, chose John Tyler as his running mate. The campaign was a spectacle: log cabins, cider barrels, and the immortal slogan "Tepu and Tyler too." It worked. Harrison won by a landslide and Tyler became vice president of the United States. Little did anyone know he'd be president within a month. When Harrison died just 31 days into his presidency, the nation was thrown into confusion. The Constitution was vague. Was Tyler acting president or the new president? Tyler made his position clear. He was fully and officially the president. He took the oath, moved into the White House, and began exercising presidential powers. Some mocked him as his accidency, but he stood firm by asserting his right to the office. Tyler set a crucial precedent for presidential succession that would guide the nation for centuries. Once in office, Tyler clashed with the Whig Party almost immediately. He vetoed their plans to reestablish a national bank, infuriating party leaders, including Henry Clay. The Whigs expelled him from the party, the only U.S. president to lose the support of the party that elected him. His cabinet resigned. Albert, Secretary of State Daniel Webster, and Congress attempted to impeach him. Tyler was a man without a party governing alone, and yet he pressed on. Tyler's greatest achievements came in foreign policy. He signed the Webster-Asherton Treaty, resolving border disputes with Britain, pushed for trade with China, sending the USS John Adams and USS Columbia to open diplomatic relations. Advocated for the annexation of Texas, a move that would later ignite sectional tensions but also expand American territory. He believed in a bold, expanding America, though his methods often ignited controversy. During his presidency, Tyler's beloved wife Letitia Christian Tyler died, making her the first lady to die in the White House. A year later, Tyler stunned Washington by marrying Julia Gardner, a 24-year-old socialite. 30 years his junior, they became the first presidential couple to marry. While in office together, they had 7 children on top of the 8 he had with Letitia. In total, Tyler fathered 15 children, more than any other U.S. president. Tyler saw the annexation of Texas as his crowning goal. Though rebuffed by Congress at first, he worked tirelessly behind the scenes. Just before leaving office in 1845, Tyler secured a joint resolution to admit Texas as a state, fueling expansion but also deepening the divide between North and South over slavery. It was a final flourish from a man few had expected to lead. After leaving office, Tyler returned to Sherwood Forest Plantation in Virginia, but when Southern states seceded in 1861, Tyler's allegiance remained with his native South. He opposed war, but ultimately joined the Confederate Congress, becoming the only former U.S. president to take such a step. He died before taking his seat on January 18, 1862 in the North. His death was ignored in the South. He was buried with honors. John Tyler defied party lines, broke expectations, and rewrote constitutional precedent. He was a president who wasn't supposed to be, and yet reshaped the office forever. Some call him stubborn, some call him principled, but all agree he mattered. His story is one of unexpected power, lonely leadership, and quiet determination. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, picture a man walking alone through the halls of the White House, knowing the nation doubts him, but leading anyway. Imagine a quill scratching out letters to foreign dignitaries of a mind burning with plans to secure borders, broker peace, and expand a fledgling union. Because John Tyler believed in the Constitution above all else, the presidency endured even when the world was unsure. How James K. Polk, the relentless, visionary. On November 2nd, 1795, in a log cabin in Pineville, North Carolina, a boy was born who would one day redraw the map of a nation. His name was James Knox Polk, and from humble frontier routes, he would rise to become one of the most determined and underrated presidents in American history. Sickly as a child and often in pain due to exhaustion, young James underwent surgery at age 17 without anesthesia. The pain would mark him, but so with the toughness he developed from surviving it. He was quiet, focused, and serious. His mother instilled in him deep religious values, while his father encouraged ambition. Polk graduated from the University of North Carolina with high honors and a reputation for sharp debate. After studying law in Tennessee under Felix Grundy, he opened a legal practice and quickly entered politics. He was elected to the Tennessee legislature, and in 1825 to the U.S. House of Representatives, where he would serve for 14 years. Polk was a staunch Jacksonian Democrat devoted to Andrew Jackson's vision of limited government, expansionism, and popularis. He rose to become Speaker of the House, the only president in history to have held that role. After a brief stint as governor of Tennessee, PK seemed to vanish from the political spotlight until 1844, when the Democratic National Convention found itself deadlocked with Martin Vannin unable to secure enough support due to his opposition to the annexation of Texas, and no clear alternative. A compromise emerged. James K. Polk, he was dubbed the dark horse candidate, unexpected, unassuming, but perfectly poised. He ran on a platform of annexing Texas, asserting American claims over the Oregon Territory, and acquiring California from Mexico. He promised to serve only one term, but to get things done he won. Polk entered the White House in 1845 with a laser-sharp agenda: lower tariffs, to promote trade, establish an independent treasury, settle the Oregon boundary with Britain, acquire California and the Southwest from Mexico. Most presidents' dream. Poole acted. He worked tirelessly, often late into the night, reading every bill, writing his own speeches, and maintaining a punishing schedule. Even his cabinet members struggled to keep up. He was intense, precise, and disciplined, a man of few words but fierce results. Within months, had re-established the independent treasury system, passed the Walker Tariff, one of the lowest in American history, negotiated the Oregon Treaty with Britain, setting the boundary at the 49th parallel. But his most dramatic and controversial achievement came in the West. In 1845, Texas was annexed into the Union, sparking tensions with Mexico, which still claimed the territory. Sent troops to the disputed border, and when Mexican forces attacked, war was declared. The Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848, was one of Polk's most defining chapters. Critics called it a war of aggression. Polk defended it as a matter of national honor and destiny. U.S. forces under General Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott captured key cities, including Mexico City. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848 granted the U.S. more than 500,000 square miles of territory, including California, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and parts of Colorado and Nevada. In just 4 years, Polk had added more land to the U.S. than any other president. True to his promise, Polk did not seek re-election. He had set goals, achieved them, and left office exhausted, but the consequences of his expansion were profound. The new territories reignited debates over slavery, setting the stage for the Civil War. Though he had accomplished more in one term than many presidents did in two, his legacy was complicated. He returned to Tennessee, finally free to rest. Just 3 months after leaving office, James K. Poole died of exhaustion and illness on June 15, 1849, at age 53. He had worked himself to the bone, giving his life to the presidency. His wife, Sarah Chris Poole, would live for another 42 years, fiercely guarding his legacy. He was buried at his Nashville home and later moved to the ground of the Tennessee state capitol. Poole is rarely listed among the most famous presidents, but historians admire him for being the rare politician who kept his promises. He was methodical, fearless, and effective, yet not without controversy. His expansionist policies fulfilled the dream of manifest destiny, but deepened divisions that would nearly destroy the Union. Still, he reshaped the United States forever. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, imagine a man hunched over a desk lit by candlelight, scribbling plans to push borders westward, to balance budgets, and to secure a young nation's destiny. Picture him standing at the map of North America, imagining a United States that stretched from sea to shining sea, and then making it real. Because James K. Polk believed in action over applause, he changed the course of a continent. Zachary Taylor, the soldier in the saddle. On November 24, 1784, in a small log cabin in Orange County, Virginia, a baby boy was born who would spend most of his life on horseback. His name was Zachary Taylor, and though no one could have guessed it then, he would ride from the wild frontiers of early America all the way to the White House. Shortly after his birth, the Taylor family moved to Kentucky, settling near the banks of the Ohio River. It was rough country, full of danger, promise, and the spirit of West expansion. Zachary grew up strong, rugged, and unpolished. He received only a basic education, but he was tough, loyal, and Fearless in 1808, Taylor joined the U.S. Army as a first lieutenant, not for fame or glory but out of duty. What began as a modest commission became a military career spanning 4 decades. He fought in the War of 1812, the Black Hawk War, the Second Seminole War, but it was during the Mexican-American War that Taylor truly rose to national prominence with his gruff demeanor, plain speech, and love for simple comforts. Soldiers called him Old Rough and Ready. He led from the front, slept in tents with his men, and earned their unwavering loyalty. In 1846, as war erupted with Mexico, Taylor was placed in command of U.S. forces. He won crucial victories at Palo Alto, Roca de la Palma, Monter, but it was the Battle of Buena Vista in 1847 that made him a legend. Outnumbered and outgunned, Taylor held his ground against a larger Mexican army under General Anna. His defiant message to Washington became famous: "I shall win or die." He won. The American public adored him without seeking it. Zachary Taylor had become a national hero. Taylor had never voted in a presidential election. He had no political experience. He wasn't even sure which party he belonged to, and yet in 1848 the Whig Party nominated him for president. His war record, honesty, and nonpartisan image made him the perfect candidate for a nation tired of party squabbles. He won the election, defeating Lewis Cass and Martin Van Buren, and became the 12th president of the United States. "I am a Whig, but not an ultra-Whig," he said, true to his independent streak. Taylor took office in March 1849 and almost immediately faced the brewing storm of sectional conflict over slavery and new territories acquired after the Mexican-American War. California applied for statehood as a free state, angering Southern leaders who feared a loss of power. Though Taylor was a slaveholder, he opposed the expansion of slavery into the new territories. He threatened to use military force against any state that tried to secede. Disunion as treason. He declared his stance shocked the South and reshaped the narrative of who Zachary Taylor truly was. On July 4, 1850, after attending Independence Day ceremonies in scorching heat, Taylor returned to the White House, ate raw fruit and cold milk, and fell violently ill. Within 5 days, he was dead. July 9, 1850. The cause of death remains debated: acute gastroenteritis or something darker, but what's clear is this: Zachary Taylor's presidency lasted only 16 months. He was the second president to die in office. Though brief, Taylor's presidency revealed a man of principle, willing to stand against powerful interests to preserve the Union. He had no taste for politics, but he loved his country. His unexpected death paved the way for Millard Fillmore, who had signed the Compromise of 1850. Some believe Taylor would have opposed it. His family buried him in Louisville, Kentucky, where his tomb still stands. Zachary Taylor wasn't polished, he wasn't poetic, but he was honest, brave, and loyal to the men he led and the country he served. He spent more time in tents than in parlor, more years on horseback than in debate, and when called to lead, he didn't hesitate. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, imagine a dusty soldier with sun-leathered skin sitting by a campfire, jacket undone, sword resting beside him. Picture him rising to lead men into battle, then later rising to lead a fractured nation with the same grit and quiet resolve. Because Zachary Taylor believed in doing what was right, not what was easy, he earned the trust of a nation. Millard Fillmore, the gentleman from Buffalo. On a snowy winter night, January 7, 1800, in a modest log cabin nestled in the hills of Cuyahoga County, New York, a boy was born into poverty and hardship. His name was Millard Fillmore, and though the world he entered was cold and unadorned, he would rise to stand beneath the great dome of the U.S. Capitol as the 13th President of the United States. His father, Nathaniel Fillmore, was a tenant farmer, and young Millard grew up knowing the bitter edge of poverty. There were no tutors, no polished manners, no famous family name, only a love of books, a desire to learn, and the slow-burning ambition of a boy who refused to stay small. He was mostly self-educated, teaching himself by the light of a fireplace and borrowing every book he could find. He apprenticed as a cloth maker and later studied law, scraping together enough money to attend New Hope Academy and later become a lawyer in Buffalo, New York. His life was not destined, it was carved from hardship with stubborn hands. In Buffalo, Fillmore quickly became respected for his diligence, modesty, and fairness. He was soft-spoken, courteous, and exacting. He married his childhood sweetheart, Abigail Powers, a schoolteacher, just as serious-minded and bookish as he was. Together they built a home of quiet learning and mutual ambition. In 1828, Fillmore was elected to the New York State Assembly and in 1832 to the U.S. House of Representatives, where he served multiple terms. A member of the Whig Party, he supported economic modernization, the American system, and internal improvements like roads and canals. He was no firebrand, he was a listener, a negotiator, a man who preferred thoughtful compromise to bold declarations. But in a time of brewing storm, the gentle temperament would become both his strength and his burden. After Congress, Fillmore served as New York State Comptroller, introducing accountability and reform to public finance. He also helped found the University at Buffalo, later serving as its first chancellor. Education to him was not only a ladder, it was a legacy. In 1848, the Whigs nominated Zachary Taylor, the war hero, for president. To balance the ticket with a Northerner and a moderate, they selected Millard Fillmore as vice president. The combination was unusual, a rugged general and a quiet legalist, yet it worked. They won the election as vice President. Fillmore had little influence. Taylor largely ignored him, but everything changed when President Taylor died unexpectedly in July 1850, thrusting Fillmore into the highest office of the land. The nation he inherited was on the brink of collapse. The debate over slavery in the new territories had reached a boiling point. California wanted to join as a free state. Southerners threatened secession. Congress was in deadlock. Fillmore, the accidental president, stood at the center of it all, holding a fragile union in trembling hands. To many, Millard Fillmore will always be remembered for signing the Compromise of 1850, a package of laws meant to calm the fury between North and South. California entered as a free state. The slave trade, but not slavery itself, was abolished. In Washington, D.C., Utah, and New Mexico were organized as territories with no restriction on slavery. The Fugitive Slave Act was passed, mandating the return of escaped slaves to their owners, even from free states. Fillmore believed the compromise would save the Union. He called it the final settlement of slavery. Expansion. He signed all its components, including the Fugitive Slave Act, though he did so with heavy reluctance. Many in the North never forgave him for it. The compromise temporarily quieted secessionist talk, but polarized the country further. Northern abolitionists burned Fillmore in effigy. Southern radicals distrusted him anyway, and the Whig Party, already divided, began to fracture beyond repair. Yet Fillmore remained firm. He believed in the Constitution above politics, the Union above parties, and peace above ideology. He modernized the White House, strengthened the Navy, and sent Commodore Matthew Perry to Japan, laying the groundwork for future trade relations with Asia. These foreign affairs would not bear fruit in his time, but he planted the seeds nonetheless. In 1852, Fillmore failed to gain the Whig nomination, losing to Winfield Scott. The Whigs lost the election, and the party all but collapsed. In 1856, Fillmore returned once more, this time as the candidate for the Know-Nothing Party, a short-lived movement built on nativism and opposition to immigration. He ran not to win, but to restore order and balance. He only won Maryland, but his presence in the race split votes and foreshadowed the rise of the Republican Party. After that, Fillmore retired from politics for good. Fillmore's later years were spent in Buffalo, where he became a beloved civic leader. He founded libraries, served on hospital boards, and helped rebuild the city after a devastating fire. His beloved Abigail had died while he was president. In 1858, he married Caroline Carmichael, a well-educated widow. He died on March 8, 1874. At the age of 74, by then the Civil War had come and gone. The compromise he once hoped would save the nation had only delayed the inevitable. Millard Fillmore was not a visionary or a warrior. He did not light fires, he tried to quiet them. He was a man of books, law, and balance, a man who rose from poverty to the presidency with no help but his own mind and effort. He is remembered with complexity, even controversy, but behind the compromise was a man trying desperately to hold a nation together. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, picture a small house in Buffalo warmed by a fireplace. Inside, a quiet man with silver hair is bent over a book, reading by candlelight. He is not dreaming of power, he is dreaming of peace. He is hoping his country will remember the power of patience, learning, and compromise, because Millard Fillmore believed that unity is built by ordinary people doing their quiet part, even when the noise of history is deafening. Franklin Pierce, The Handsome Tragedy. On an autumn morning, November 23, 1804, in a small town called Hillsborough, New Hampshire, a baby boy opened his eyes to the world. His name was Franklin Pierce, and though no seer could have foretold it, he would one day become the 14th President of the United States. He was the son of Benjamin Pierce, a Revolutionary War veteran and twice governor of New Hampshire. The Pierce household was first but nurturing, full of duty and service to the Republic. Young Franklin was charming, gentle, and well-liked. He had a kind smile, a glimmer in his eye, and a softness in his soul. He studied at Bowdoin College, where he roomed with the future writer Nathaniel Hawthorne, forming a lifelong friendship. His classmates noted his warmth, wit, and ability to win hearts with his speeches. Though blessed with charm and eloquence, his life would be shadowed by loss and sorrow. By his mid-20s, Pierce had already been elected to the New Hampshire legislature, then the U.S. House of Representatives, and later the Senate, the youngest member at the time. But despite his rapid political ascent, he remained humble and gentle in manner. He abhorred confrontation and believed deeply in the Union. He married Jane Means Appleton, the delicate religious daughter of a college president. Where Franklin was social and affable, Jane was shy and melancholy. Their love was tender but tragic. She hated politics and Washington's pomp. He loved her dearly, and often sacrificed his ambitions to keep her happy. In 1842, He resigned from the Senate to return to New Hampshire and private law practice, prioritizing family over politics, but fate would not allow him to remain in the quiet hills for long. When war broke out with Mexico in 1846, Pierce volunteered to serve. President Poole appointed him a brigadier general, though mocked by some as inexperienced. Pierce proved courageous in battle, leading troops in difficult terrain despite suffering a debilitating leg injury. He returned home with a hero's welcome, but his victories were personal proof to himself and others that he was not merely charming but brave. His name gained national prominence again, though he sought no glory. In 1852, at the Democratic National Convention, party leaders were deadlocked. After 48 ballots, they turned to a compromise, the unifying figure who offended few and charmed many, Franklin Pierce. He had been out of politics for a decade. He was largely unknown on the national stage, but his good looks, military service, and unblemished record made him the perfect dark horse running against the aging war hero Winfield Scott. Pierce campaigned on unity, peace, and democratic values. He won in a landslide just weeks before Inauguration Day. Tragedy struck. Franklin, Jane, and their son Benjamin, the last of their 3 children, were traveling by train. A sudden derailment flung the train cars off the track. Young Benny was killed, decapitated before their eyes. Jane was devastated. She believed the presidency was a punishment from God and withdrew into mourning. Franklin was crushed. He entered the White House with a broken heart. Pierce's presidency began with great hope, but quickly unraveled. He supported the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which repealed the Miso Compromise and allowed territories to decide the slavery issue through popular sovereignty. Pierce believed it would calm sectional tensions. Instead, it ignited violence known as Bleeding Kansas. As pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers clashed, his administration's inability to quell the bloodshed eroded his popularity. He enforced the Fugitive Slave Act, angering Northern abolitionists, and his firm stance on maintaining Southern support cost him the trust of his party. He was called a Northerner with Southern sympathies. His vision of union at all costs seemed blind to the growing moral crisis. In 1856, the Democrats abandoned Pierce and nominated James Buchanan. Instead, Franklin returned to New Hampshire a defeated and grieving man. He and Jane lived quietly. She remained in mourning until her death in 1863. Pius never recovered from losing his sons, his wife, and his reputation. When the Civil War broke out, he opposed secession but criticized Lincoln's wartime powers. Old allies turned away. Once a beloved orar and friend to presidents, he became a lonely relic of a bygone era. His drinking increased. His correspondence with Nathaniel Hawthorne remained one of his few comforts. Franklin Pierce died on October 8, 1869 at the age of 64 in Concord, New Hampshire. His passing received little fanfare. His presidency was remembered as a cautionary tale, yet even in failure there was depth to his struggle. A man caught between love and duty, torn by national division, and ultimately overwhelmed by sorrow. Franklin Pierce. His name rarely graces the lists of great presidents. He is remembered more for what he did not do, for the crisis he could not stop and the peace he could not preserve. But behind the disappointment was a man who believed deeply in the Union, who loved his family fiercely and wanted healing more than power. Perhaps he was not built for the stormy world of 1850s politics. Perhaps he was a man too gentle, too grieving for a nation approaching war. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, picture a quiet room in a New Hampshire home. A man sits alone by the fire, a letter from an old friend in one hand, a glass in the other. He is not plotting power. He is remembering a little boy with a bright smile, a wife's gentle laugh, a country that once felt whole because Franklin Pierce believed in unity more than politics, and in peace more than pride. He became a portrait of sorrow in a time of fury. James Buchanan, the bachelor in the storm. On April 23, 1791, in a log cabin in Cove Gap, Pennsylvania, a baby boy was born to a frontier merchant and farmer. His name was James Buchanan, and he would grow to be a man of polished manners, legal brilliance, and complex contradictions. The only bachelor president in American history, and the last to lead before the firestorm of civil war. Raised in a prosperous Scotch-Irish family, Buchanan studied at Dickinson College, where he earned a reputation for both mischief and intellect. After graduating and studying law, he opened a successful practice in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and soon became one of the state's most respected attorneys. But Buchanan's life would never be confined to the courtroom. Politics whispered in his ear, and he answered the call. Buchanan entered the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in his 20s, and then moved quickly to the U.S. House of Representatives. Serving 10 years as a Federalist-turned-Democrat, he was elegant, persuasive, and meticulous, a man who valued law, order, and diplomacy above All tall, courtly, and ever impeccably dressed, Buchanan became a fixture in Washington. He was engaged once too in Coleman, but their relationship ended in heartbreak and died soon after, and Buchanan never married, dedicating himself wholly to public service. Over the next decades, Buchanan served as minister to Russia under Andrew Jackson, United States Senator from Pennsylvania, Secretary of State under James K. P.K. Ware. He helped oversee the resolution of the Oregon boundary dispute and supported the Mexican-American War in 1853. President Franklin Pierce appointed him minister to Great Britain, where Buchanan helped negotiate the controversial End Manifesto advocating for the U.S. acquisition of Cuba. The document later sparked fierce backlash, but Buchanan's time abroad kept him clear of the growing political chaos at home, something his supporters would use to their advantage. By 1856, America was tearing at the seams over slavery, territorial expansion, and state sovereignty. Buchanan's long resume, moderate stance, and absence from the Kansas-Nebraska debates made him an ideal Democratic candidate. He ran against Republican John C. Froer and former President Millard Fillmore, winning the presidency with support from the South and Northern Democrats. He would become the 15th President of the United States, inheriting a union fraught with tension from the beginning. Buchanan sought to be a constitutional steward, believing that compromise and law would hold the nation together, but his efforts often appeased the South while alienating the North. He supported the pro-slavery L. Compton Constitution in Kansas, despite obvious corruption in the process. He believed slavery was a matter for the states and territories to decide, not the federal government. Then came the infamous Dred Scott decision, in which the Supreme Court ruled that African Americans were not citizens and that Congress had no right to ban slavery in the territories. Buchanan had pressured the court behind the scenes, a breach of executive impartiality that damaged his credibility. During Buchanan's final year in office, the crisis deepened. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry shocked the nation. The Democratic Party splintered along sectional lines. Abraham Lincoln was elected in 186-60 without a single Southern state won. By one Southern states seceded from the Union. Buchanan, paralyzed by legalism, declared secession illegal, but also claimed the federal government had no authority to stop it. He did nothing to stop the seizure of federal forts, arsenals, and navy yards across the South. As the Union fractured, Buchanan insisted the Constitution offered no remedy but patience. In March 1861, Buchanan handed the presidency to Abraham Lincoln. As he departed the White House, he is said to have told his successor, "If you are as happy in entering the presidency as I am in leaving it, you are a very happy man." He returned to Wheatland, his Pennsylvania estate, where he spent the rest of his life writing his memoirs and deaf in his legacy. He died on June 1, 1868, a year after the end of the Civil War. James Buchanan is often ranked among America's least effective presidents, blamed for his failure to act during the most critical moment in the Union's history, and yet he was not a man of malice. He was a man of law, trained in diplomacy, who believed compromise could cure any wound. But the nation needed courage, not caution. It needed vision, not delay. His tragedy was not his intent, it was his inaction. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, imagine a grand estate in Pennsylvania, its halls lined with books, its study aglow with candlelight. A white-haired man sits at a desk, pen in hand, trying to explain what went wrong. He was no tyrant, no villain, just a man who could not stop a rising tide, because James Buchanan believed the Constitution could hold back the storm. He waited for peace while war marched. In Abraham Lincoln, the Emancipator Light, on a quiet Sunday morning, February 12, 1809, in a single-room log cabin in Hardin County, Kentucky, a child was born who would one day redefine freedom for a nation. His name was Abraham Lincoln, and from the humblest of beginnings he would rise to become the 16th President of the United States and one of its most beloved. He was the son of Thomas and Nancy Hanks Lincoln, frontier farmers of modest means. Life was hard. The family moved, often eventually settling in Indiana and later Illinois. Lincoln's mother died when he was 9, leaving a tender scar that never truly healed. He had less than a year of formal schooling, yet devoured every book he could find: the Bible, Shakespeare, and law books, shaped to mind sharpened, not in halls of academia but under oil lamps in the wilderness. Tall, gangly, and awkward, he became known for his quick wit, deep melancholy, and uncanny wisdom. As a young man, Lincoln worked as a rail splitter, store clerk, postmaster, and surveyor, slowly building his reputation in New Ulm and then Springfield, Illinois. He studied law on his own, passed the bar in 1836, and began practicing in Springfield. He traveled the circuit courts by horseback, becoming known as a compelling storyteller, a sharp legal mind, and a man of absolute honesty, earning the nickname Honest Abe. In 1842, he married Mary Todd, a sharp-witted woman from a wealthy, the Kentucky family. Their marriage was often fiery but full of affection. They would have 4 sons, though only one, Robert, would survive into adulthood. Lincoln served in the Illinois state legislature as a member of the Whig Party and later won a term in Congress. He opposed the Mexican-American War and denounced the spread of slavery, but his views weren't yet radical. For a time he returned to law, his political future uncertain. Then came the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, allowing slavery to expand into new territories. Lincoln was horrified. He returned to politics with new purpose, helping to build the Republican Party founded on opposing slavery's expansion. He wasn't an abolition in the strict sense, but he believed slavery was morally wrong and politically corrosive. Then came 1858 and the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates challenging Senator Stephen A. Douglas. Lincoln engaged in a series of debates across Illinois, dazzling audiences with his moral clarity and sharp rhetoric. A house divided against itself cannot stand, he declared. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. He lost the Senate race but won national fame. In 1860, he secured the Republican nomination for president and won the general election, defeating a fractured Democratic field. The South saw his election as a threat. Even before his inauguration, 7 states seceded. Abraham Lincoln entered the White House in March 1861, with the nation already unraveling. In April, Fort Sumter was attacked. The Civil War had begun. Lincoln was an unlikely war president, no military background, no battlefield experience, but he proved to be a master strategist, choosing commanders carefully. After many mistakes managing public opinion and expanding executive powers, he faced criticism from all sides. Too slow to act, too fast to act, too radical, not radical enough. Yet through it all he remained steady. He read poetry when alone, paced the White House with sorrow, and buried 2 of his children while in office. Yet he carried the weight of a dying and rebirthing nation. On January 1, 1863, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all slaves in Confederate-held territories were free. It didn't end slavery entirely, that would take a constitutional amendment, but it transformed the war into a moral crusade and allowed black soldiers to join the Union Army. If my name ever goes into history, he said, it'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it. It was the boldest step of his presidency. In November 1863, Lincoln traveled to a battlefield in Pennsylvania to dedicate a cemetery there. In just 272 words, he gave the Gettysburg Address, a speech that redefined American democracy, that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. The war dragged on, bloody and uncertain, but Lionel remained committed to reunion and mercy, refusing to demonize the South. In 1864, Lincoln was re-elected amidst exhaustion and loss. His second term began with hope. General Ulysses S. Grant was closing in on victory, and Lincoln spoke of reconciliation with malice toward none, with charity for all. Let us bind up the nation's wounds. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox. The war was over. Just 5 days later, on April 14, Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater. He was shot by actor and Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth. He died the next morning. Lincoln's death stunned the world. His funeral train wound through cities where millions mourned. He was not just a president, he had become a symbol of unity, sacrifice, and the promise of America. He preserved the Union. He ended slavery. He redefined liberty. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, imagine a tall figure walking slowly through the White House, reading Shakespeare under candlelight. Grief in his eyes, but iron in his soul. Picture him leaning over the desk to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, not as a gesture, but as a rebirth of the nation's soul. Picture him in a crowd at Gettysburg, uttering words that still echo across centuries, because Abraham Lincoln believed in the better angels of our nature, and by doing so he helped save a broken country. Andrew Johnson, the tailor in turmoil. On December 29, 1808, in a small log cabin in Raleigh, North Carolina, a baby boy was born into hardship. His name was Andrew Johnson, and he was rise from poverty and illiteracy to become the 17th President of the United States. His father died when Andrew was just 3 years old. His mother, a washerwoman, struggled to support the family. At 10, Johnson was apprenticed to a tailor and never received a formal education, but he was sharp, observant, and driven. As he sewed coats and trousers, he listened to political debates and absorbed the voices of the people by sheer determination. He taught himself to read. His wife, Eliza Martle, helped him improve his writing and speaking. They built a quiet life in Greenville, Tennessee, where he opened his own tailor shop and eventually entered politics. Johnson rose quickly in Tennessee politics, becoming a mayor, state legislator, a congressman, and eventually governor of Tennessee. He was a populist before the term existed, championing small farmers, mechanics, and the working class. He opposed elite planters and viewed slavery as a system that oppressed poor whites as well as enslaved black Americans. Though he himself was a slaveholder for much of his life, in 1857, he entered the U.S. Senate, and though a Democrat from the South, he remained loyal to the Union. As the Civil War loomed, when Tennessee seceded, Johnson was the only Southern senator who refused to leave the Senate. For this, Lincoln admired him. During the Civil War, Johnson was appointed military governor of Tennessee. Working to restore order and protect Union sympathizers in 1864, Lincoln, seeking to unify the North and South, chose Johnson as his vice president on the National Union ticket, a bold move pairing a Southern Democrat with a Northern Republican. The ticket won, but just weeks into their second-term, tragedy struck on April 14, 1865. President Lincoln was assassinated the next morning. Andrew Johnson was sworn in. Johnson inherited a nation in ruins, its heart torn out by war and assassination, but Johnson was no Lincoln. He sought quick restoration of the Southern states, offering leniency to former Confederates and opposing efforts to protect the rights of newly freed slaves. He vetoed key civil rights legislation, including the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and bills establishing the Freedmen's Bureau. Congress overrode his vetoes, marking the first time in U.S. history that major legislation passed over a president's objections. Johnson's presidency became a war not with foreign powers but with Congress itself. The radical Republicans in Congress, led by men like Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner, believed Johnson was undermining Reconstruction and enabling Southern resistance. When Johnson tried to remove Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, a violation of the newly passed Tenure of Office Act, Congress had enough. In 1868, Johnson became the first president to be impeached. The impeachment trial in the Senate was a national spectacle. Johnson was accused of violating the Tenure of Office Act, but the deeper issue was his defiance of Congress and obstruction of Reconstruction. He was acquitted by one vote. A single Republican senator, Edmund G. Ross, broke ranks, believing the trial was politically motivated. Johnson remained in office, but his power was shattered after his term ended in 1869. Johnson returned to Greenville. He tried to stay involved in politics, unsuccessfully running for the Senate and House. Finally, in 1875, he was elected to the U.S. Senate, becoming the only former president to return to the Senate. He served just a few months before dying of a stroke on July 31, 1875. Andrew Johnson is remembered as a president who resisted progress at a critical moment. He valued states' rights over civil rights, and his obstruction of Reconstruction delayed justice and equality for millions. And yet he was also a man of perseverance who rose from nothing, remained loyal in a time of betrayal, and stood firm in his beliefs, however flawed. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, picture a man bent over a needle and thread, sewing coats for farmers and preachers, listening to voices that echoed into history. Picture him sitting alone in a smoky room, torn between past and future, struggling to understand the country he tried to lead, because Andrew Johnson believed in mending a broken union but lacked the vision to make it whole. Ulysses S. Grant, the quiet general. On April 27, 1822, in the river town of Point Pleasant, Ohio, a quiet boy named Ulysses Grant was born. Later, through a bureaucratic mix-up at West Point, he would become known to history as Ulysses S. Grant, a name that would be etched into both the battlefield and the presidency. He was the son of Jesse and Hannah Grant, raised with strong values of hard work, humility, and perseverance. Young Ulysses preferred to books, solitude to society. He was gentle, reserved, and had no dreams of greatness. At age 17, he received an appointment to West Point. He didn't want to go, but he went, and though he never excelled academically, he was an extraordinary horseman, known for his calm courage and quiet resolve. After graduation, Grant served with distinction in the Mexican-American War under General Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott, gaining valuable military experience. But developing a lifelong distaste for war, he married Julia Dent, a Southern woman from a slaveholding family with whom he shared a tender, enduring love. They would raise 4 children together, but peacetime proved difficult. Posted to remote forts and separated from his family, Grant struggled with depression and alcohol, a battle he would quietly face throughout his life. In 1854, he resigned from the army. Over the next few years, he failed at farming, real estate, and business. By 1860, he was working in his father's leather goods store in Galena, Illinois. Humble and nearly forgotten. Then came Civil War. When the war began in 1861, Grant offered his services to the Union, appointed colonel and soon brigadier general. He quickly earned a reputation for action and determination. His first major victory came at Fort Donelson in Tennessee, where he demanded unconditional surrender, a phrase that captured the public's imagination and earned him the nickname Unconditional Surrender. Grant at Shiloh, he faced fierce criticism for heavy casualties but refused to be shaken. His belief: wars are not won by timidity. President Lincoln saw something rare in Grant, a man who fought and did not complain while other generals hesitated. Grant moved forward. In 1863, Grant orchestrated one of the most brilliant campaigns of the war, the Siege of Vicksburg. It gave the Union control of the Mississippi River and split the Confederacy in two. Lincoln rewarded Grant by placing him in command of all Union armies. Grant moved east, facing off against Robert E. Lee in a brutal campaign of attrition. Battles like the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, and Cold Harbor were bloody. And indecisive, but Grant pressed on. He besieged Petersburg and slowly strangled the Confederate supply lines. Finally, on April 9, 1865, Lee surrendered to Grant at Apat Courthouse. Grant's terms were generous. He allowed Confederate soldiers to return home with their horses and sidearms. The war is over. The rebels are our countrymen again. Grant returned home, a national hero celebrated with parades and songs. He had saved the Union and was widely admired for his humility, calm leadership, and quiet strength. In 1868, with the nation still healing, the Republican Party nominated him for president. His campaign's slogan was simple: let us have peace. He won decisively, becoming the 18th President of the United States. Grant's presidency was shaped by the struggle to rebuild the South and protect the rights of formerly enslaved people. He supported the 15th Amendment granting black men the right to vote and used federal troops to fight the Ku Klux Klan. He created the Department of Justice, signed the Civil Rights Act of 1875, and appointed African Americans and Jewish Americans to government posts, but his presidency was also marred by corruption scandals. Grant himself was personally honest, but many of his appointees were not. The whiskey ring, credit mobilia, and other scandals stained his administration. Despite these failures, Grant remained deeply loyal, sometimes to a fault. After leaving office in 1877, Grant and Julia took a world tour, welcomed by kings, queens, and emperors. He was treated like a global celebrity, admired for leading his country through its darkest days, but financial trouble awaited in retirement. Grant trusted the wrong people and was swindled in a Ponzi scheme, losing his entire fortune soon after he was diagnosed with throat cancer. Facing death and poverty, he began writing his memoirs, an extraordinary account of his life and military career. He finished them just days before he died, ensuring financial security for Julia. He died on July 23, 1885, and was mourned as a national treasure. Grant's reputation rose and fell with time. For years, he was remembered primarily for the scandals of his presidency, but in recent decades historians have come to admire him as a civil rights champion, a stabilizing force, and remarkably humble leader. He was not a brilliant speaker nor a political tactician. He was a man who acted when others faltered, who stood firm when others wavered. He fought not for glory, but to hold the Union together, and to ensure liberty for all. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, picture a man in a dusty blue coat standing beneath the red and white stripes of a worn battle flag. He does not speak much, he writes, he rides, he remembers, he leads, not with flash or fury, but with steady resolve, because Ulysses. Yes, Grant believed in peace through perseverance, and by holding the line, he helped a wounded nation find its way. Rutherford B. Hayes, the gentleman of compromise. On October 4, 1822, in Delaware, Ohio, a baby boy was born to Sophia Burchard Hayes. Just 10 weeks after the death of her husband, she named him Rutherford Burchard Hayes, and from the very he lived in the shadow of both absence and resilience. Sophia raised Rutherford and his sister with quiet strength and fierce independence. She read to them, often nurturing a love of books and a strong moral compass. Rutherford grew up bright, thoughtful, and soft-spoken, traits that would define his adult life. He studied at Kenyon College, where he graduated as valedictorian and later earned a law degree from Harvard. He returned to Ohio to build a life as a lawyer, respected for his intellect and integrity. He married Lucy Webb, an educated and principled woman who would become the first lady to hold a college degree. Together, they raised 8 children, 3 of whom survived to adulthood, and shared a deep commitment to abolitionism, temperance, and reform. When the Civil War broke out, Hayes didn't hesitate. Though nearly 40 and a father of young children, he volunteered for the Union Army and quickly rose to the rank of brigadier general. He was wounded multiple times, most seriously at South Mountain, where he continued leading his men even after being shot through the arm. His bravery earned him the loyalty of his troop and the admiration of his peers. After the war, Hayes entered politics. He served as a U.S. congressman and then as governor of Ohio, earning a reputation as a moderate reformer. He was praised for his honesty, his advocacy for public education, and his efforts to support African American rights. In the post-war years, in 1876, the Republican Party nominated Hayes for president, an uncontroversial, honest man. At a time of widespread political fatigue and scandal, his opponent was Democrat Samuel J. Tilden, a reform-minded governor from New York. The election was one of the most disputed in American history. TN won the popular vote, but 20 electoral votes from 4 states were in dispute. After weeks of confusion, backroom negotiations, and a special electoral commission, a deal was struck, the Compromise of 1877. In exchange for Hayes becoming president, Republicans agreed to withdraw federal troops from the South, effectively ending Reconstruction. Rutherford B. Hayes was inaugurated in secret on March 3, 1877, under heavy guard. Though born of compromise, Hayes's presidency was guided by integrity and idealism. He believed in equal rights, civil service reform, and healing a divided nation he ended Reconstruction believing the South could be reconciled through good faith, a belief later proven tragically naive, fought against political patronage, reforming the civil service, and paving the way for the later Pendleton Act, supported education for Black Americans, and spoke openly about the need for racial justice even as federal enforcement dwindled, refused to seek a second term, staying true to his promise of serving only one. Hayes was often criticized for being too passive, too idealistic, but he governed with deep conviction and unshakable ethics. After leaving office in 1881, Hayes retired to his estate Spiegel Grove in Fremont, Ohio, but retirement didn't mean rest. He dedicated his time to promoting education, particularly for Black students and those in the South, supporting prison reform, advocating for rehabilitation over punishment, championing temperance and civic responsibility. He was appointed to various education boards and philanthropic organizations, quietly continuing the work he believed in. He and Lucy, his lifelong partner in both heart and principle, remained devoted until her death in 1889. Hay followed her 4 years later, passing away on January 17, 1893. Rutherford B. Hayes is rarely listed among America's most famous presidents. His name doesn't inspire monuments or dramatic legends, but his life was a model of modesty, service, and moral courage. He was a man who believed in doing the right thing, not the flashy thing. He sought to restore trust in the presidency, to soften the scars of war, and to guide a fractured nation back toward hope. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, picture a man walking through quiet woods in Ohio, his hand in his wise, his thoughts on children learning in schools he helped build. He smiles softly, not because he was celebrated, but because he served, because Rayford B. Hayes believed that leadership was not about power but about purpose.